Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's Dark Side of Tech special, we will be travelling into the woods with our robotic girlfriend in companion and then confronting a rogue evil released on the internet in World Tree. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Well, in a similar vein to World Tree, picking up on a comic we once reviewed, I have been reading a load of stuff from the Ultimate line at Marvel, including Ultimate Spider-Man, which we covered the first couple of issues of, I think, last year. And they've also got Ultimate Black Panther, Ultimate X-Men, and The Ultimates, which is basically the Ultimate Avengers. So yeah, I went on Marvel Unlimited, their subscription streaming app, and read everything that's on there. So that's basically everything up to releases from 3 months ago, which is the delay for putting things on the app. So for those of you who haven't memorised our previous review or aren't into comics, the premise of the Ultimate line is that it's an alternate universe in which a supervillain from the regular Marvel universe has travelled, and he has basically used a time machine to, one by one, prevent all the Marvel heroes from existing by, sabotaging their origins, by, preventing Captain America from being found in the ice, or preventing the Spider from biting Peter Parker, and so on and so on. And then once he has prevented all the heroes from existing, he has basically taken over the world from the shadows by setting up this evil cabal. And yes, we now cut forward to the present day, in which someone has found out about this and has got access to the Maker's backlog of tech and superhero origins that he's sabotaged, and is now trying to bring the superheroes into existence about 2 decades after they would have done. So we've got Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man when he's in his, it feels like, sort of mid-30s, after he's already married to Mary Jane, and yes, the world is just sort of adrift, and everyone's just sort of bumbling along in this vague sense that something's wrong and missing. So yeah, this has been probably the most successful, certainly, group of books at Marvel in the last couple of years, and it was originally sort of masterminded by Jonathan Hickman, who wrote this 4-issue miniseries called Ultimate Invasion, which set up the premise of the universe, and then he now writes the Ultimate Spider-Man comic every month. And yeah, as I really enjoyed Ultimate Spider-Man, and as I have access to all these comics for, one annual subscription fee, I thought I would go in and read the entire line. So about a year and a bit of 4 different comics. And yeah, it's a good time, this. I think Ultimate Spider-Man is still the best one, which is nice for me as a Spider-Man fan. It's got a certain enjoyable sort of character-driven ponderousness to it, this sort of thoughtful adult take on Spider-Man in which he's just slightly more concerned with the responsibility of what he's doing and the difficulties of being a vigilante in an adult world where you have a family and perhaps arguably shouldn't be doing this. And yeah, at this point they've moved on to this storyline where he's sort of befriended Harry Osborn, who is this sort of proto-Green Goblin, and they're sort of trying to work out how to make the world a better place in this complicated modern world, which is being, again, secretly controlled by an evil cabal, represented in this comic by the Kingpin, who is kind of the Maker's New York representative. But yeah, Ultimates is also quite fun in a sort of more upscale political way, in which the Avengers, the Ultimates, are trying to get a bit more into exactly how the Maker is controlling the world, and trying to, I think the premise is in every issue they try and reactivate a different Marvel hero, and this sort of gets into a different area of the universe. There's sort of the Hulk, which ends up being this sort of weird scientific experiment which has irradiated a bunch of islanders. In a lot of cases it turns out that a different person has actually ended up becoming the hero. The tech has ended up falling into someone else's hands for various reasons. So there's a different Hawkeye, there's a different Hulk, but on the other hand some of the characters are the same. It's a fun reimagining. It's an interesting sort of extrapolation from this plot engine that Hickman set up.
It does sound very interesting. Certainly, I think a way to get new combinations or new stories out of existing well-known characters, coming up with a way that's believable but changing things around. I guess because some of these characters are they've been writing them for 60 odd years under a lot of writers, so it must be difficult to find something new. But this does sound like they have found a genuinely different take on it.
I mean, it's interesting because it's the sort of thing which, if they'd done it 30 years ago, it wouldn't have been particularly accessible, because a lot of what they're doing is playing off the ideas people already have about the characters, and a lot of these characters outside of Spider-Man and the X-Men weren't that well known outside of hardcore comic fandom. But now that most people have a vague idea who most of the most famous Avengers are, they can do this sort of thing, and it can actually be quite widely accessible and successful.
Yeah, certainly Black Panther, I think, is a good example of that, who's someone I don't think was particularly well known, and even someone who watched Marvel animated series as a kid. I wasn't really aware of Black Panther until this film came out, grosses over $1 billion worldwide, becomes a huge cultural touchstone, and then now everyone knows who Black Panther is.
Yeah, Black Panther's probably not the best of the series, but it's a very sort of strong sort of political superhero comic. There's a nice sort of push and pull of Black Panther struggling with his heritage and dealing with this sort of attack on Wakanda from, I think, Khonshu and Ra, who are this sort of rival gods who are also on the Maker's evil council. And there's also this sort of ongoing ticking countdown going on in the background to the comics, where in 2 years the Maker is meant to re-emerge from this prison they've locked him into and fuck everything up. And both Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimates have this strict timeline of each issue is 1 month in story time. Yeah, once we get to 2 years from the start of the line, presumably there'll be some kind of big Maker-related crossover. Again, if it ends up being Hickman writing it, I have faith it'll at least be interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of, I guess, the big moment they're building up to, like an Avengers crossover movie. It's interesting writing. Sounds like there's quite a sort of strict structure to these things. Like I say, you've got the thing about reactivating a different superhero in each issue. You've got this like month by month timeline thing, which is, interesting to make something so, the structure so rigid. I suppose it does limit the storytelling. But then again, people like Hickman especially are such talented writers, they can probably use the restrictions to their advantage to tell an interesting story.
It is interesting with Ultimate Spider-Man because, as you sort of saw when we read the first 2 issues, and this has continued, I'm up to about issue 14, 15 now, I think. You can't really have like an immediate cliffhanger, like picking up a second later in the next issue, because the next issue will be like a few weeks to a month later. So it is forcing some slightly more creative storytelling, but so far I've been enjoying it.
Yeah. I guess you can have a twist like a big revelation, something like that, that has implications. That can be like a sort of, oh my God, what's this going to lead to? But you can't have I don't know, like Spider-Man, well, I was about to say falls to his death, or appears like he's falling to his death, but he can't, obviously, because he's Spider-Man, but that's a bad example. But, you can't have like a moment of peril, because then, it'd be like, how does he get out of this? Well, we'll find out 1 month later.
I mean, a lot of the time it ends up being this sort of study of the sort of implications of something. Like something happens which has like big possible implications, then you pick up a few weeks later and a lot of those things have kind of happened, and a lot of what you're picking up with is how the characters react to it. Like, you still got this subplot where Ben Parker and J. Jonah Jameson are starting a new sort of underground newspaper thing, which was started off in the first couple of issues. And that's still a lot of fun, partly because I guess it's a very interesting combination of characters we already know doing something that seems interesting and different. Like, obviously, Uncle Ben being alive and a journalist and working with J. Jonah Jameson is something we haven't seen before. And J. Jonah Jameson is one of these characters who just steals the scene quite easily whenever he's in it, just with his deranged ranting. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of it a lot when we read Ultimate Spider-Man, though I can only hear J. James Jameson's dialogue in J.K. Simmons' voice. I think there's probably a lot of people like that because of his role in, well, first the Sam Raimi Spider-Man and then in the Spider-Man No Way Home. So, and I don't think I'm alone in that. But I did really like that because it was different and it was interesting, them setting up a sort of rival independent news organization after the kind of mainstream newspaper had been taken over by the Kingpin and muzzled, which obviously, a lot of interesting things they're exploring there with the way, say, that like Bezos has taken over and muzzled the Wall Street Journal and things like that. So it's touching on things we're familiar with from our world and also, coming up with a Marvel twist on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, setting up the Ultimate Universe as one that's ruled by this sort of cabal of powerful people who everyone kind of knows about but can't really do much about. It's kind of, it's hard not to see some parallels with the real world. Yeah, maybe that's one reason why this line has been quite successful. It's an unusual actual success in drawing some comparisons with real things that are happening. So yeah, Ultimate X-Men, just to complete the set, is a bit of an odd one. It's by the writer-artist Peach Momoko, and it's kind of a set off on its own in Japan, and it's just about this small group of mutants who are slowly coming into their power and deciding to call themselves the X-Men. It's a sort of quite thoughtful YA comic in which they're just focusing on their feelings one moment at a time as they come into themselves. This vague sense that mutant rights as a thing never really spread across the world because there just wasn't a Charles Xavier, so they're having to sort of struggle with this on their own. It's quite sort of off on its own, and I think just because there isn't really that much like big action, it feels quite different from a lot of Marvel comics. But again, the fact they're doing something different does make it interesting, and Peach Momoko's art is really, really lovely, so that helps.
Yeah, that does sound good. Definitely different. A whole sort of different characters, different setting, different vibe. Oh yeah, I was going to ask how they kind of undid the X-Men, I guess, because Maker can't stop mutants happening, I suppose, unless he has control over evolution, but I suppose he can stop the X-Men forming.
Yeah, it seems like the main thing that's happened is the sort of worldwide mutant rights movement hasn't really formed. There hasn't really been an X-Men or any equivalent of an X-Men, except for this movement that's slowly coming together in Japan.
Yeah. So it's just like, what if the mutants' right movement began in Japan rather than America? Which is, a very different take on it.
Yeah, and it was just a few random teenagers, yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds interesting. Yeah, as I was saying, it sounds like they've generally found a way to do something new with these very well-established characters who've been through a lot of stories, so it must be hard to come up with something new and interesting. That also, I guess, has to work as a consistent whole story, but also be individual stories, for, the different characters, X-Men, Spider-Man, because we just read the Spider-Man issues, but it did hold together as a story in its own right about, a middle-aged Peter Parker going through a period of malaise, thinking this there's something missing from his life, and then discovering he was supposed to be, someone special. I mean, there's just a story in that I think a lot of people who are middle-aged can relate to, this idea of like, my life was supposed to go in a different way. Yeah, so that was interesting.
Well, yeah, when we read that, you hadn't really read any of the Maker stuff. It didn't seem to stop you from understanding the comic.
No, exactly, yeah. So it was, it's well written in the sense that it stands alone as a story by itself. Again, because they're tapping into something that is, like, universal and a relatable character thing that you can connect to. And things like that. And I guess I've read and seen enough Spider-Man. I mean, we read some Ultimate Spider-Man comics as well during the old recommendation section, and obviously we've seen lots of different versions of films and cartoons. So I guess I know enough about Spider-Man to know that like this is like a different version. But it was also good actually to go into that not really knowing what the setup was and just kind of jumping straight in. It was a good story. It's something I would like to go back to. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all on Amazon and Marvel Unlimited. So yeah, at any point I can pick it up. So I should do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on what quantity of it you want to read, there's probably going to be cheap sales or something if you want to just buy the Ultimate Spider-Man collections, or you can just gorge them on Marvel Unlimited like I'm doing.
Well, I'm interested in if it becomes like a discrete story, like it's something that runs for, I don't know, 20, 50 issues, whatever it is, tells a complete story and ends, because then you can sit down and read it like a novel, I suppose, rather than like a serial of a thing that just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, more like a soap opera.
Well, yeah, I mean, the remaining big question, I guess, will be once they've done this Maker crossover or event or whatever that's going to happen, presumably in early 2026, will the line end? Will the line just sort of carry on but feeling less like it has a direction? Will Jonathan Hickman leave at that point? Who knows? But I'm hoping we'll at least get to see out whatever his plan was for this 2-year Maker storyline.
Yep, sounds good.
So yeah, that's what I've been doing. Lots of comics. Alastair, what have you been up to?
So I've come to recommend a film to everyone. It's probably a film you've heard something about recently. So I went to see Anora in the cinema, a little bit late as it came out a while ago, but just in time for it to sweep the Oscars this year, or at least do very, very well. Yeah, and I'm here to say I felt that was a thoroughly deserved win. The film walked away with Best Picture, Best Actress for Mikey Madison, Best Director for Sean Baker, I think Best Original Screenplay as well, and maybe a few others. It's a very, very good film. I enjoyed it a lot. It's an interesting movie that follows this stripper who meets this teenage boy, or early 20s, actually, he's like 22 or something like that. But yeah, pretty young, sort of young man who comes to a strip club. He's Russian and he wants to speak to her, or like, have a dance from her because she understands Russian and she can understand him. And then she sort of becomes his, private escort. I'm not sure the way to put it. And then things escalate. And then in a sort of drunken escapade in Vegas, they end up getting married. And obviously it's revealed that he's actually the son of a Russian oligarch and has uber wealth, or his dad has uber wealth, but also is like uber connected and has a lot of political influence. And yeah, and it's a sort of tragic story. What happens to her, how she gets sucked into this, and then how eventually what happens when the kid's oligarch family, or how they react when they discover what he's done. It's a great film. It's well directed by Sean Baker. He's a really interesting director. I've seen quite a few of his films: Tangerine, Florida Project, Red Rocket. One of his sticks is working with like non-professional actors. And there's quite a lot of people in here who are like unknowns or non-professional actors, and it's really, they're really good. He's really great at getting these kind of very authentic performances from people who aren't professionally trained performers, which is, really good. Also, quite a few of his films focus on sex workers. That's like a recurring theme, which obviously is definitely a theme here. It's quite an upsetting and, powerful movie. It's got the final scene is just really quite devastating. But also it manages to be like really, really funny in times. There's just this various chaotic scenes of bumbling Russian goons trying to intimidate this stripper, and then her feistiness being too much for these hardened goons to handle. And there's a lot of chaotic scenes of lots of people yelling at each other and like silly things going on that are kind of weirdly funny because they're just quite ridiculous. So it's a film that's got a lot going on for it, for quite a short film with a relatively simple premise, but there's not a lot happening. There's only about kind of like 5 key events, but I thought it was brilliant, and I felt it really deserved to win those Oscars.
Yeah, no, I had heard some buzz about this a while ago, even before we got into Oscar season. So yeah, it seems like it was a deserving winner. I haven't seen it, but people seem mostly happy that it won. A lot of the awards momentum going into the ceremony seems to be with either this or my beloved Conclave. And much as I would have liked to see Conclave sweep the awards just to validate my own enjoyment, people seem happy with this one.
Conclave was very good. I did like it a lot and put it in the top 5 films for last year. Conclave did really well at the BAFTAs. It won like best film there. I guess that's the thing, because it's a kind of a British co-production based on a British novel with a largely British cast. That's the sort of thing that the BAFTAs tend to reward more. However, getting nominated in so many categories, including Best Picture, is a huge accomplishment for Conclave. And I think it did walk walk away with Best Adapted Screenplay. So it, won some things on the night. And I think, yeah, absolutely, it's a great adaptation of Richard Harris, who's a great writer. So yeah, that's a deserved win. There was a lot of momentum behind The Brutalist, which I really liked. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah, obviously, I think about 2 or 3 episodes ago when I raved about that. Adrian Brody got his Best Actor win, which is his second one, I think. He's won 2 Oscars now for portraying Holocaust victims, previous one for The Pianist. But he's very good in that film. And obviously, Kieran Culkin got his much-deserved Best Supporting Actor for A Real Pain, which we both really, really liked. And I think, yeah, an absolutely great win for him there.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed to pretty much sweep the various award ceremonies, didn't he? He seemed to win basically everywhere for supporting actor.
He won the BAFTA, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's such a great performance. Yeah, it's a great performance. It's a great film. I feel like it is quite unfairly snubbed by the Oscars for at least not getting a Best Picture nomination. And yeah, and Jesse Eisenberg not getting a Best Director nomination for masterminding the whole thing and directing himself to bring out a great performance from himself and directing Kieran Culkin to bring out a great performance from him. So, as well as writing and producing. So, it seems unfair, but I'm not in charge of these things. My beloved June walked away with a lot of special effects and sound and awards, which is fair enough. I guess they get a third bite of the cherry with June Messiah, which comes out next year, possibly. But yeah, possibly a bit too mainstream for Oscar wins. But then again, I mean, I like June a lot. It was my favourite film of last year. But I suppose it doesn't need any more attention focused on this, like, enormous film with a huge, like, marketing budget and a high-profile cast and, like, a big event film. Whereas Anora is great to have, like, a little film, with not a lot of money behind it and not a lot of attention behind it, doing well to get to, like, a bigger audience. And I really like Sean Baker as a director. I think he's really, really talented. And although his films usually get, like, a lot of screenings at, like, Picture House and things like that, even I think in the art house world, in the British art house world, he's not, like, a huge hitter. And if this means that he gets more attention for whatever he's doing next, that's great as well. So it's good that, like, I guess the Oscars can use the fact to focus people's collective attention on a less well-known film rather than a huge film like Wicked or Dune that has already a lot of attention on it.
Nice for Wicked and Dune to be nominated, I guess, but I never really saw them winning. They're not the sort of films that Oscars tend to exist to reward, is it? It tends to either be sometimes a vague attempt to uplift something interesting, or sometimes just Hollywood slapping itself on the back and giving awards to the sort of people it already likes.
Yeah, that's very much the case, yeah. I mean, when they upgraded the number of Best Picture nominees each year from 7 to 10, one of the things they said is they were going to nominate more commercially successful films. I guess because it's...
With the emphasis on the word nominate.
yeah, yes.
Nominate, but not actually award.
But not actually praise, apart from in the technical categories where they always were well spoken for anyway. And I understand the point is basically to be like the Oscars should kind of reflect what people actually see to some degree, rather than just being this kind of elitist little corner of saying like, oh yes, who cares what the shit munchers went to see? Like let's reward this other little film. Although it's never like a Serbian film. There's actually a movie called A Serbian Film with that title. It's a horrible film, so that was really bad choice of words. It's never like a Bulgarian documentary investigating corruption in Bulgarian government. Yes, because documentaries count as films and can win, Best Picture. Although that was a genuine nominee in the documentary category a few years ago. When they say the Oscars focus its attention on less well-known or less popular movies, it basically means American independent cinema. Occasionally a British or like Canadian film sneaking in, and very occasionally they give awards in the big categories to foreign language films. Parasite obviously being the big exception, and which I'm so glad it won. And Emily Perez, the actress from that, whose name I've forgotten, did walk away with the Best Supporting Actress this year. So
Zoe Saldana.
Yeah, but like I say, when I say the Oscars tends to focus on stuff that's non-mainstream, it's non-mainstream independent American cinema or low-profile Hollywood stuff, the sort of thing that a well-known Hollywood actor or director doing an interesting turn. It's rarely, like I say, like a non-English language film or something genuinely unusual, experimental. I don't know how many Little White Lies cover films get nominated for Best Picture. Dune probably being one of them, one of the few. But
I mean, it didn't feel like it was an open and shut year. There were lots of films which mostly people agreed were good, but there didn't seem to be one obvious massive juggernaut. So I don't know, there were some that were more controversial. There seemed to be some debate over whether Emilia Perez was actually any good, but not seen that film.
Yeah, a lot of people really didn't like it. Javier Baker Whitelaw, I remember, who thought it was really, really bad, posting on Blue Sky.
Yeah, I did listen to her Overinvested podcast where she covered a few of the Oscar films with her co-host, and they absolutely put the boot into that film.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been a backlash against Brutalist, well, partly for its use of AI, another controversial issue, also the length. A lot of people feel that, like, the trend of films getting longer and longer is not one they're willing to embrace. Although the intermission in the Brutalist really did help. Although I'm on the record for saying I thought it used its length well, but that's not by any means a consensus opinion. Yeah, then, like, A Complete Unknown, a lot of people like that, but then some people feel like, it's more lionizing Bob Dylan. Some people also not so much in favor of that. And yeah, and it was just quite a divided year, which does make an interesting year. Very hard to predict what was going to win. I really thought The Brutalist might take it because it is a great American story of someone coming to America and then finding a way to express themselves in the freedom of America and then pressing up against the system. A story about the possibility that America offers to appeal to the right, but also a story about the immigrant experience and how difficult that can be to appeal to the left. But Anora was great, so yeah, I guess go see it.
Okay, and first up today, we are talking about Companion, a sci-fi dark comedy thriller film written and directed by Drew Hancock, starring Jack Quaid as a man who turns up to a weekend in a lake house with his friends and brings along his new girlfriend, played by Sophie Thatcher, who turns out to be, well, a robot, sort of a robot girlfriend. Wackiness and horror ensues when Iris, the robot, discovers that she is, in fact, a robot. And yes, we have seen this film. Alastair, what did you think of it?
Well, I liked it a lot. It was kind of my jam, I feel very much. It's funny, it's quite dark, it's quite violent. I think it balances the tone quite well of being, sometimes quite dark and explores a lot of dark themes, which I'm sure we'll come to. And also having like genuinely moments of humor and, dark comedy, but also quite violent, but also quite serious. So I thought that was really good. It used this sci-fi concept of, a familiar sci-fi trope of, there are robots that look like people. Are they really people? Who is human? What qualifies someone as human in the world? An interesting sci-fi trope. We used it again in the most interesting ways is to explore some big questions about sentience and also about the politics of gender relations and relationships and things like that. So yeah, this ticked a lot of boxes for me. So yeah, overall I kind of really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a film that comes in the spirit of several big, like, late 2010s film trends. We've had films that are a bit like Get Out. We've had films that resemble episodes of Black Mirror, and this film is kind of doing both those things and actually doing a pretty good job as well. It's a sort of well-pitched combination of dark comedy and actual action drama in that, yeah, bleak, awful things happen, and it's also got, a clear satirical edge to it. And yeah, does it make its point in a kind of quite on-the-nose way? Did I kind of guess roughly what the film was going to be about fairly early on when Jack Quaid told Sophie Thatcher that she should smile more? Yeah, kinda. But, even if it's not the subtlest satire in the world, there is an actual plot beyond this theme, and that plot does have a lot of good twists in it, beyond the fact she's a robot. We won't be spoiling those twists, at least not yet. But there is a lot to this film beyond the fact she's a robot, I guess, is what I'm saying. So if you're worried that you've had the entire plot spoiled for you by the trailers and now also by us, then don't worry, there is more. And I think it does go along at a decent pace and crack through these twists in quite a steady, entertaining way.
Yeah, the interesting twists, I think, really did add something to it. That the plot evolves, as it goes along. And what you think is the premise is not what actually unfolds, which, speaking in sort of cryptic half points because, again, trying to dance around spoilers. But I like the fact that I didn't know where it was going into the film, which obviously, yeah, made the twist much more surprising and stuff. And interestingly, I read several analysis pieces about the film, which, props to the writers, managed to dig into the themes of the film without actually spoiling the crucial twists. I mean, obviously they explored the fact that, like, she's a robot, but yeah, some of the twists they didn't spoil, which is why, even though I'd read quite a bit about the film, it was actually surprising to see it, which was good. I guess partly because in order to analyze the themes, you don't need to reveal every detail of the plot, which is what we hope to do here.
Well, yeah, I mean, the theme, as I say, the theme of basic misogyny, the theme of, the boyfriend treating his girlfriend like a thing. It's quite easy to, analyse at length without necessarily spoiling exactly what then happens in the actual plot, because the two are kind of quite separate from each other. In some ways, part of me feels that's almost a weakness in that would it have been more of an effective horror piece if the theme had unfolded a bit more slowly and subtly. But a lot of the time, this sort of film, this sort of really straightforward dark comedy does just go straight on the nose, just really give that nose a good punching. And yeah, that's clearly what they've done here.
Yeah, I mean, it's more subtle than some episodes of Black Mirror, but
Barely.
yeah, even barely, and also Black Mirror really not known for its subtlety among things. And there's nothing wrong with sometimes like saying what you want to say and saying it with your chest, as I believe the kids said probably 10 years ago. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's upfront about what it's trying to say. As you say, like quite early on when Jack Quaid tells Iris to smile more, you know exactly where you're on, and it's a clear metaphor for abusive or dysfunctional relationships. He just uses her for his own ends. He doesn't see her as a person or anyone, just something he can use to get what he wants at various points, whether that's his own sexual gratification or, well, yeah, other things that I won't spoil because there's twists and things like that. And then, yeah, as things don't go his way and when it turns out that she has wants of her own, as inevitably in these sci-fi things, the machine becomes more self-aware and independent, he then becomes angry and possessive. So there's some quite obvious things, and he's very entitled as well. So there's, again, they're touching on these like quite obvious themes, as well as exploring some of the more Black Mirror-esque themes of the degree to which technology is replacing our relationships or how we relate to each other is like through technology as well, which is some of the more straight up things it's addressing, as if like, what if we could replace people with robots because they're more compliant or less demanding? How would that affect our relationships? So yeah, I mean, it's touching on quite a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the fact that a lot of the tech aspects of this is done in a very, I don't know if plausible is the word, but a sort of coherent way in which, the machine doesn't just magically become self-aware. It becomes self-aware due to a series of bad decisions by its owner, basically. Or it becomes more aware, and it becomes more free due to a series of terrible ideas he has, which then sort of cause the machine, Iris, to turn on him. Yeah, it does actually make sense and follow naturally. There is quite a good sort of plot progression here. It's quite, I guess, well-written thriller in that elements are put in place, which then come back into play later in quite clever ways. It's a very tight screenplay.
Yeah, I would really agree with you saying with a tight screenplay and that, like, there's not a lot in it on paper, which is why it's not too long, and it's focused on a core group of characters. Again, I think this is an independent film, or like partially independent. It's clearly relatively low budget. It pretty much all takes place in one location. There's a few flashbacks, things like that, but mainly at this house in the forest. There's just a handful of characters. There's about sort of 5 or 6 in total. If something's mentioned, it's setting something up for later, and the way things escalate is totally believable. There isn't that sort of, I don't know, like moment when the machine just suddenly jerks into self-awareness, such as in like the Terminator TV show when Skynet becomes self-aware because it's playing with a child who wants to play with a different set of toys, and then just tells the computer it can change the rules to make its own game or something like that, and then just that sentiment means the machine becomes self-aware, which is maybe a good scene in a TV show, but like it's not so believable. This one's a bit more complex, partly because the story is focused on Iris's character growth. She's the main character, and the arc plot, as well as like the violence, which is the external conflict. Her internal personal conflict is growing to become her own independent, self-aware person, and it happens in stages. And every time it happens, it does relate to the sort of thriller plot. So, as you said, it's very well written. It's sufficient sort of tight thriller writing.
Yeah, and I guess it's in a sort of Black Mirror-y way. It's leaning into our familiarity with certain types of tech, and the way Iris is set up and configured is all very what we're used to from using various apps, which plays into the horror of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, and we're more used to engaging with AI now that we have like Alexas in our home, and people use AI tools for like to help them with work or things like that, or get them pre-packaged with their work software. So people are more aware of the intricacies of these things. So then, films don't have to explain. AI can be more or less intelligent based on how you customize it and things like that, Which links back to what I was saying, like it's playing into these contemporary issues and fears around technology. As we all become more aware of technology and it becomes a more and more increasing presence in our lives, we're seeing that reflected back to us in our culture. There's all this concern. So you go on social media and like you're interacting with people, but are you interacting with a real person? Are these just AIs, disinformation AIs, bots created for social media, things like that? It raises this fear, like, are the people you're talking to real people? And this just takes it one step further by making it something that works better as a film, which is like have people played by human actors, but the characters some of them are artificial.
Yeah, and those human actors are pretty good. Jack Quaid especially, I think, is doing a nice job of sort of slightly playing on his I'm the nice relatable guy one persona from The Boys, which I guess this is a source of a spoiler, but I've already heavily implied it, which, makes the reveal that his character's a bit of a dick a little bit more of a twist, or at least a little bit more entertaining.
Well, it subverts that trope. It's like an old school trope that's been thoroughly subverted, that like, someone who comes across as nice and charming and friendly, oh, actually, but just because they're nice on the surface, they can still be a nasty abuser underneath. It's not just like, people you think would be horrible are the ones who are horrible. It's people who present themselves nice. I mean, yeah, as you're saying, that's partly because we assume this character is like his character from The Boys, like a fundamentally decent guy, and then it's a twist when it turns out that he's like possessive, he's jealous, he's entitled. I thought it was a great cast. I do like the fact that, again, it's mainly drawn from the world of TV, from all TV shows that I like. Obviously, Sophie Thatcher, who, I'm enjoying in the third series of Yellow Jackets. I think she's great, and she's been great in the previous series of Yellow Jackets as the main character. Good to see her getting a bigger, chunkier role in a film. Also nice to see, I'm really sorry if I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Harvey Gwen from What We Do in the Shadows. The great breakout comedy performance there as the long-suffering Guillermo, the vampire's familiar. Here again, playing a character who, it's got a bit more spine and bite to him than Guillermo. So again, but you're kind of, it's riffing off that a bit, that you assume he's the kind of the soft, nice one when he first appears, and then there's like, a twist about how ruthless he is. I enjoyed seeing these people who I've enjoyed in other things in a film altogether.
Yeah. Sophie Thatcher was good in Heretic as well. She seems to be possibly one of the breakout stars from the sort of Yellow Jackets teen section.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having a bit of a moment, and she's really good here as well, because she's playing, again, a robot. It's a very limited, tight performance at times, but she does a good job of this sort of not necessarily moving or emoting very overtly, but sort of screaming behind the eyes here.
Yeah. But also a robot that's been programmed to unconditionally love her owner, boyfriend, the Jack Quaid character, and but also designed to look like a person, behave like a person, and blend in. So she does do a good way of conveying someone who is just sort of totally enamored and dependent on their partner, which is what the machine's supposed to be like, which also then links into the themes of controlling and abusive relationships and her journey of growing and becoming a person. I really would recommend strongly to people. Laurie Penny wrote an essay about this film on her Substack. I think it's called like XX Danger, I think the essay is called. I'll put it out on Blue Sky so you can all find it there. There's a really good essay that kind of explores this film and, again, what it has to say about gender roles and relationships, the metaphor for how gender roles imprison women, and the way she's forced to be the perfect girlfriend. She disregards all of her own wants and desires to make him happy. She's dedicates everything to looking after his wellness and satisfying his sexual needs, and all of those things are very much built into the relationship. But this is making it apparent because she's a machine supposed to do this, but obviously this is the pressure that society puts on women to do this. I mean, I'm just stealing her points, so I'm saying do go read that essay, but I thought the film did a really good job of expressing those themes, as well as expressing the themes about our concerns with technology and the dynamics of abusive relationships. So there's really a lot going on here beneath the surface.
And there's also, as we said, although have avoided describing, there's also a good thriller plot with some entertaining violence as well.
Yeah.
It's not just about, grim spousal abuse. There's also some slightly less uncomfortable, good old-fashioned fun violence.
Yeah. And I also did like a bit when a robot character puts on a police uniform in order to do some murders. That was very reminiscent of Terminator 2, I think, a clear nod to another sentient machine murder film. So it's just a nice little nod for them, like, I see what they're doing there. That's just a little thing.
Yeah, no, good, solid mechanical murder. No, I enjoyed this. It's been a bit of a sort of sleeper hit, this one. I've seen a lot of posts occasionally sneaking across my various dashboards saying, oh, this is really good, actually.
Yeah, I felt people with their finger on the pulse have really raved about it, such as Laurie Penny, hopefully us. Do we count as people with our finger on the pulse? Whereas, it's not as high profile as some of the bigger films out right now. Bridget Jones is currently being programmed across the nation in about 20 screenings a day in every cinema. But it's not got the profile of these higher profile films, but everyone who's seen it seems to really like it, so go see it.
Okay, and lastly today, we will be talking about World Tree. This is a comic series by James Tynion IV and Fernando Blanco. We covered, I think, the first issue a couple of years ago, and now we're back to talk about the first two complete storylines, or issues 1 to 11, if you're reading the individual issues. So, this is about the Undernet, a mysterious dark side of the internet that is rising up and threatening to engulf the world, and the only people who stand in its way is Gabriel Winter, a reclusive tech millionaire, or at least a very successful tech man, and his group of friends who apparently beat the Undernet back once when they were younger and must now come back to it as they have grown into their 30s, 40s and become generally a bit more miserable and disaffected. And also, of course, as the internet has spread much more widely into all our smartphones, and therefore the rise of an evil internet is much harder to combat. Meanwhile, a mysterious naked woman called Fear is also randomly slaughtering people who threaten to disrupt the rise of the internet. So yes, we have read the first 11 issues of this. Alastair, what did you think?
I really like this. I'm totally hooked. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to read. I say an absolute pleasure to read, much in the same vein as Companion. It's pretty dark and pretty violent. But again, maybe I'm just revealing too much about myself, but I've definitely enjoyed these dark, violent thrillers about the evil side of tech, or at least the potentially massively damaging side of tech. So I've enjoyed both of these, although maybe Companion was more about tech emancipating itself from the humans who've mistreated it. This is definitely tech unleashing horrors on the poor and suspecting humans. What I really like about this, it's got a great thriller plot line to it. It's well paced. There's some good twists. There's lots of interesting characters, and it's got this kind of tinge of horror to it. In that, yeah, there's a lot of violence, a lot of dark things happen along the way, but it is, I guess, kind of ultimately like a thriller. It's a very dark techno thriller. The thing it reminded me the most of was David Fincher's Seven. And I think there's a real like David Fincher vibe to this, in that, you know, there's not a sort of there is a supernatural, almost even biblical element to this, so there's that element to it as well, and there's serial killers, so there's quite a lot of overlap, but it's more that element of, it's a thriller that's unfolding with like, you know, mysteries being solved and layers of a conspiracy being revealed, but with a real kind of violent horror edge to it, more intense than your average conspiracy thriller. For example, last time I talked about Prime Target, which is just a really good conspiracy thriller. This has got another level to it. It's got that kind of really dark horror violent side to it, which I really liked.
Yeah, I think the fundamental hook of this is it does successfully nail the metaphor of, you know, the nasty dark side of the internet rising up to kill us. Which, again, because there's a vague feeling that, you know, that is kind of happening in reality, that gives you that nice sort of unsettling feeling, and it's also got, you know, lots of nice bloody horror action. I think it's a different vibe to Companion, if only because I think it's a bit more of a sort of serious techno thriller, whereas Companion, I think, does have a bit of a sort of dark comedy, sort of little knowing smile to it. Like, I talked about Companion making its themes fairly obvious and being fairly on the nose. This is, although it is kind of obvious what it's talking about, I don't think it's quite as wry and straightforward. I think it is actually demonstrating its themes through action a bit more. But at this point, 11 issues in, they're still pretty clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, really touching on stuff that's very much in the contemporary zeitgeist, as we've been talking about with everything we've discussed in this episode. But I like, this is a bit of a twist, but not like a huge twist, so I feel confident dropping it now, which is, this plot is mainly about something horrible on the internet making people do horrible things. It's implied that it's like a demon or a gateway to hell or something like that, brought about by people looking at really, really dark, disturbing things on the internet, which, you know, clear metaphor for 4chan and, you know, sort of edgelord culture. And, you know, some of the people who are taken over by this demon are like, yeah, described as like misanthropic internet teenage edgelords. You know, we're all familiar with the type. But then there's an interesting twist at one point when it's revealed that the contagion, this demonic presence or whatever it is, isn't spread necessarily via the internet. It's spread person to person through human connection. And that is, I thought, a really interesting twist, because it's more about how, you know, narratives spread or ideas spread in our world, and also that's kind of more of a metaphor for, say, the alt-right, a violent political contagion that spreads person to person throughout networks. You know, something that's more, you know, not as tech-based as, say, 4chan edgelord culture, but something that's more political and has more salience in the physical offline world. And obviously one of the big plot developments in this is when the horrible stuff online spills over into a whole series of like mass shootings and murders, things like that, which obviously relates to the various mass shooting things done by the alt-right, you know, and QAnon movement and things like that. So it's touching on a lot of contemporary fears, but again, doing it through this lens of like, well, it's a demon thing from the internet rather than a political contagion. But again, it's very easy to see what it's talking about and what it's tapping into.
And although, you know, when you talk about it like it's a demon, I think, again, skating the dirty edge of spoilers, but if anything is being slowly revealed as the series goes on, it's that, you know, the things about the dark undernet and fear, which seem like they might be horrific things emerging from hell, might actually be a bit more man-made than we'd like to think. You know, it might just be people doing these things in some way. Obviously, we haven't fully got to the bottom of it yet, but it is starting to seem worryingly like that.
Yeah, I mean that's again an ongoing horror trope, and like sort of dark sci-fi trope. Turns out, the people are the worst things, and actually the demon is us. So yeah, that's I think where they're going with that. Again, it's like doing these tropes, things like that, but evolving them, coming up with like smart takes on them. But although like again, I've seen that before, I've never seen it done through quite obviously a metaphor for the alt-right and 4chan edgelord culture. There's clearly like really tapping into something very contemporary using that well-established horror trope.
Maybe it helps that it's very sort of well suited or aimed at roughly our generation, these characters who grew up online and are now slightly horrified by what the internet is becoming,
Yeah, exactly.
Can we relate to that? Maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely pitched at someone our age. Yeah, and especially as like the main characters. Well, there's quite a lot of characters in as well, which is one of the things I really liked about it. Is it covers like a really wide range of characters, and there's quite a lot of different plot lines going on. It's got a real kind of like broad scope to it. But one of the, I guess, main group of characters are the Gabriel Winters friends, who are now again middle-aged people with their lives are a bit sort of gone off the road. They're not quite living the lives they'd want to varying degrees. One of them's divorced, some of them just seem quite unhappy. And then there's like flashbacks to them, when they were teenagers, and again, like our teenagers, when the internet was more of a nerdy thing and also like less all pervasive, and when they encountered the undernet before. And also that bit has a very It vibe with this whole thing of like, we beat the horror when we were kids, but now the horror's come back and it's bigger and nastier than before. So I dug that aspect of it.
Well, yeah, it's doing a good job of balancing this sort of ensemble cast of real people and making them all like distinct people and finding time to give them their own backgrounds. I mean, a lot of comics sometimes feel they have to pack a lot into every issue to try and keep things moving forward and desperately stop people losing interest. But this comic has a very good sort of slow, deliberate pacing. It's very chapter of a novel. So you do get the point where like, I don't know whether it'd be satisfying to read this in individual issues or whether realistically you probably want to just wait for the complete volumes to come out. But yeah, it does a good job of balancing a lot of characters and keeping everything ticking forward and having like relationships between them that are interesting and constantly in motion.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed just cannoning through these 11 issues over the last 2 weeks. For those who've been following the podcast for a while, we reviewed the first issue a while back, but I went back and reread that first issue and then the other 10 we were covering, and I read it like that, again like a novel. There's a twist usually or reveal at the end of each issue, like kind of like again the end of a chapter, but I was instantly like, right, okay, on to the next one, let's find out where this goes. So that's, I think, was kind of the best way to enjoy it. It meant that I really got immersed in the story and got hooked.
Yeah, and again, it does a good job of taking you deeper into it with each issue. Like, we know a lot more about the mysterious fear than we did in the first issue, where, again, she basically seemed like a demon from hell, and now there's a little bit more, I don't know, not understanding exactly. But I get the feeling going deeper into that character is something they're going to continue to do going forward. But yes, it'll be interesting to see where that ends up, considering that the amount of people she's, messily slaughtered on camera, that character doesn't seem super redeemable.
No, she's the primary antagonist.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things that, like, the villain, I suppose, is this demonic other world or wherever it is coming through, but, like, it needs an avatar or a figurehead, such as in the last Mission Impossible film. The villain, I guess, is the sentient computer thing slicing through the world's data, but it needs a human avatar that it's taken over and corrupted to be an actual focus as the antagonist and things like that. Again, Darth Vader is a better antagonist because he represents all the power of the Galactic Empire in a single person. But I thought Fear is a really good character. The fact that, like, she's always completely naked kind of really conveys the fact that this isn't someone human or a human who's been taken over by something else, because she's completely thrown away all social norms of clothing and not being violent and things like that. That was an interesting twist, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I did go back and listen to our review of the first issue, and I guess a point I made back then, and which I still kind of feel now, is that, her being naked all the time is a weird sort of balance between, is this just, titillating to, have an attention-grabbing lead character, and is there also something about, the way that there's a lot of pictures of naked women on the internet, and now the internet is rising up to kill us, represented by this scary naked woman. Is there something in there? You think there might be, but Tynion hasn't yet made it explicit.
Yeah, but it's thematic if it's not explicit.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to become thematic,
well, yeah.
Things like that, yeah. But it's interesting, certainly, yeah. And it's definitely, it may appear titillating on some level. When you read it, it's not. It's not titillating. It's very disturbing because it's a character who's very violent and also clearly has shed all the confines of social norms and morality. Again, like the serial killer in Seven, it's just thrown away, and a lot of Fincher characters, like murderers who've thrown away the sort of nice confines of society just to be incredibly murderous and horrible and violent to each other, which also is a perfect metaphor for that 4chan edgelord indulge culture, which is one of the reasons why it embraced Nazism and then spread Nazism across the internet, because they throw away all social niceties, all forms of social restraint, any form of this compact that we have to behave in a certain way and treat each other in a certain way if we're going to live together in society. They throw it all away. And that's what this character does. So it does combine all of that into one character through themes and things. Yeah, who knows what will be made explicit in the future ones, but it's there in the subtext, if not in the text.
Yeah, I mean, and Fernando Blanco, the artist, does do a good job of, it's not a titillating drawing of a naked woman, it's a scary naked woman stabbing people and being drawn at these weird, scary angles, often covered in blood. And yeah, it's always well handled by him, I think, and she's always this sort of slightly weird, off-kilter, scary presence in a book that is otherwise often quite realistically drawn, within a certain level of comic book realism, but still.
Yeah, and there's a lot of beautiful art across this. The violence is quite viscerally done. Again, beautiful but also disturbing. And there's lots of really interesting illustrations that capture what happens when you look at this undernet and like how the digital world kind of corrupts the mind, and that's expressed through the visual art, the visual storytelling of the comic. And also there's various bits when people fall into the undernet and it kind of dramatizes this sort of nightmare dreamscape, which is all done very creatively. And like that's the bit when like the kind of thriller offline world aspect is drawn in a quite realistic way, as you say, for for comic art, and then the expressionist nature of the art really comes out when it's trying to convey a person being corrupted and transformed by this into some kind of monster, or what it's like to fall into this horrible nightmare scape. That's when the art really goes more abstract and the artist really can do something that's like visually stunning.
Yeah, there's a combination of abstraction and this sort of digital glitchiness that they've sort of combined. I mean, yeah, Fernando Blanco and the colorist Jordi Belair as well, I'm sure, also contributing to that, to create this sort of intrusive weirdness that I guess the Fear character is also part of.
Yeah, exactly. So and it's all elements of storytelling sort of firing on all cylinders to make this good. It's visually compelling, it's well written, it's tight, it's very, as you say, it's well paced. It doesn't feel the need to cannon through huge amounts of stuff really quickly, but it is also very efficient in the storytelling, how each character is set up quite quickly, their deal is revealed quite quickly, not without any sort of really heavy-handed exposition. It's done very slickly and effectively, and you kind of get a sense of who everyone is quite quickly, and it's quite a large cast of characters, but by the end of the first few issues, everyone's been kind of fully introduced. So again, it's efficient storytelling, which is what allows it to focus on telling this dramatic plot line.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I've said before when we covered other comics, it's always impressive that a comic can actually manage having these large casts of basically regular people and keeping them all distinct, rather than when they haven't got, big, obvious character designs, like Fear. But apart from Fear, everyone else is basically a normal person, and they do a good job of keeping them all separate and keeping them all consistent.
Yep, there's even two redhead women, and they are clearly very distinctive different characters, which is interesting, because usually everyone goes, I mean, TV does this as well, the rainbow aspect, but we'll make each character different races, different ethnicities, all the rest of it, in order to, just make everyone as distinctive as possible. But yeah, possibly my favorite character was, as I mentioned, the one-eyed redhead Silk FBI agent. Yeah, who's probably, which is one of the core characters. She definitely gets the most cover art focused on her, I guess because she's the badass person with the gun and the eye patch.
I get the feeling the second storyline, specifically the sort of issues 6 to 11, I think were quite focused on her. Maybe it'll be less her in the next storyline.
Yeah, well, I guess it's her uncovering the conspiracy, because again, it's the classic storytelling trope. You've got a cop. Cops investigate things, uncover stuff. There you go. Good way to tell a mystery story. But yeah, I thought she was a really cool, compelling character. Yeah, there's a lot of compelling characters really in this. The Ellison, one of the other main characters, his sort of friend stroke girlfriend, his family are all really interesting. Gabriel Winter, again, this sort of pale, sort of white ghost of a man, very effectively done and an interesting character. But there's a lot of interesting characters here, but Silk jumped out to me as a favourite.
Yeah, as I say, she gets a lot of spotlight as the sort of action lead in the second storyline, which makes her stand out a bit. But I think there's a lot to get into with the rest of the cast, which I assume we'll be doing in future story arcs. I have no idea how long this will run for, but it feels like it's probably got at least another year or two in it.
Well, I've bought the next two issues, I think, after the second volume. So, I mean, I'm going to keep reading and keep following the story, because it's a very compelling story. And yeah, I just really want to know where it goes and how it ends, because they've set up a lot. And again, I'm not going to spoil this at all, but there's a twist in the last page of the last issue that we read that reveals more of the wider storyline, who's behind this. And that was a surprising twist I didn't see coming. So there was a big twist, and, there's more story to come. So I am definitely excited to read more.
Yeah, no, I will come back to this for sure at some point. We may well be back to it on the podcast. Who knows?
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. While you're there, please leave us a nice review. You can also find more on our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to past episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want still more beyond that, why not follow us on social media, where we are on Blue Sky, the artist formerly known as Twitter. I think we also have a Facebook page. We are all over some networks. Just search for Moderate Fantasy Violence and wait for the little purple logo to pop up. You can also follow me as nickbryan.com on Blue Sky with a dot, and nickbryan.com written out with the word dot on Instagram, where I have just started to spin up the marketing for my next Kickstarter, the second issue of Sold. So stay tuned for that.
You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky by searching for Alastair Ball. You can now also find me on TikTok by searching for Alastair Ball. Yes, I've joined the platform that was cool in 2018. As I said before, we've really got our finger on the pulse. So yeah, go follow me on TikTok if you're interested in my videos about art and architecture in London. If you want even more from me, you can visit my website, redtrainblog.com, where there's more writing, and I do theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. And on top of all of that, you can join us here in the next issue of the podcast, when we will be beefing up our superpowers in animated comic book adaptation Invincible, and then dying over and over again in clone drama Mickey 17. See you next time for all of that. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.